The Cold War was one interesting era in America. There were several proxy wars, the space race, spies, and government experiments. Now, of course, the biggest thing was the fight against communism. And how did we fight that? With bombs that can cause Chicxulub Part 2 and the extinction of the human race. That's not how we primarily fought it, but the arms race was the scariest part about the Cold War. And everyone wasn't asking, are we going to get blown up? But instead, when are we going to get blown up? And to cope with the everlasting fear of the future of this country, I've decided to look back at all the times where we almost blew each other up. 5 out of the 100 times we almost just died. In November of 1983, NATO had decided to conduct a war game called Able Archer 83, in which US troops would practice preparations for a nuclear attack. Meanwhile, the USSR was monitoring Europe in case of anything, but fortunately the Soviets knew that it was only a war game. Unfortunately, the Soviets were very paranoid and began to prepare their nuclear arsenal as they believed that the war game was a cover-up for an actual nuclear attack. They keep their preparations ready until November 11th when the war game was over, and NATO never found out about the Soviets. They had their preparations ready until much, much later. In September of 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the higher-up of the Soviet bunker Serpukhov 15, which was used to monitor the US through a satellite-based system. However, said satellite-based system of the time was very risky to use, as false alarms and glitches were prone to happen a lot. And so when the sunlight glinted off of clouds near Montana, the satellite had detected it as 5 ICBMs that were launched and heading straight to Russia. The bunker went into full panic, and many personnel urged Petrov to report back to the Soviet High Command. Fortunately for the world, Petrov went against the computer system and reported the missile launch as a false alarm. The whole incident was classified until after the Cold War, where Petrov was rewarded many humanitarian awards. Russia isn't the only one with horrible computers, which tends to be the leading cause of all these incidents. Like today, a single computer glitch like that, and so anyway, the date is November 9th, 1979 in Colorado. NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Okay, it's a peaceful morning, clocking in, and all of a sudden, the Reds are sending missiles! And we're panicking because our money's in danger. Oh, and our lives. The funny thing about us is that the moment we saw the alarm go off, the U.S. Air Defense had scrambled about 10 interceptor jets and also had the President's Doomsday plane ready. And we even readied our own nuclear arsenal. But soon it was called as a false alarm after consulting Datalight data and then realizing that it went off due to a training program. I don't think we should be trusted with weapons of mass destruction, because something like this could happen. The Cuban Missile Crisis was already a very anxious period of time, and so everyone was on edge. On October 27th, 1962, America had sent out a U-2 spy plane, and the pilot was forced to use celestial navigation. However, the Northern Lights made him drift off course and flew into Russian airspace. The Soviets began to assume the plane was a bomber plane and began to panic, sending 2 MiG fighter jets to go and destroy the plane. Luckily, the pilot was able to glide out of Russian airspace and the jets went back. Now, on the same day, near the US blockading Cuba, a Russian submarine was just lurking. The US destroyer USS noticed the submarine and dropped a non-explosive depth charge to force the submarine up to the surface. However, the captain saw them and went, "The Yankees are sending missiles!" and ordered his men to prepare a nuclear torpedo. They have those? But just like the 83 bunker incident, one of the senior officers, Vasily Arkhipov, decided to trust his gut and convince his fellow comrades to just surface and await order from Moscow. And he was right. The worst political and military standoff that if went south would have ended the world. Some context: Cuba was under the control of Fidel Castro, who had aligned himself with the USSR. Now, on October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane had photographed over Cuba and captured a Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missile being assembled. President Kennedy was then informed 2 days later and called a group of advisors and officials called the Executive Committee, or called the XCOM, if you want to get technical, and then try to find a solution to this crisis. Now some geography. Cuba is very close to mainland USA, about 90 miles south of Florida. So, hypothetically, if this missile were to be launched, or several of them, it would affect the states of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South and North Dakota, Wyoming, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Idaho, Michigan. Basically everything east of the Mississippi River and a bit of the Midwest. So death was looming. Of course, the U.S. had missiles of their own in the Eastern Europe, aka Turkey. So it was a pretty hostile era. On the 22nd, Kennedy notified U.S. citizens of the presence of missiles in Cuba. So everyone was on edge now, not even just the politicians. On the 24th, the U.S. started a blockade around Cuba, and for the next 2 days, World War III was imminent. And then on the 26th, Khrushchev had sent a message saying, hey, maybe don't invade Cuba, please. And then sent another message a day later saying, please get your missiles out of Turkey and we'll take ours out of Cuba. So the Kennedy administration agreed on the first message and declined the second message until they took out the missiles in Turkey. Well, that was the same, but at least we didn't blow up each other. Alright, well, I hope this does great for my grade.